Senator, last week, several media outlets in Washington reported that the EPA had halted the release of a study that allegedly shows that PFC contamination in our drinking water could be much more harmful to humans than we thought, and that the EPA halted this because of a, quote, PR nightmare that would cause. First, your reaction to those reports?
Well, I was very concerned and continue to be. We need to make policy decisions on things like things that are harmful contaminants to people and to the environment based on the science, not based on ideology. And this is another example of the Trump administration making decisions based on ideology, not based on the science. And we need to hold people's feet to the fire. If the science says these contaminants are bad, then we need to make sure people understand that. Now, that's a very different study, however, than the health study that we are about to engage in that will include peas. We were very pleased to see peas included in the health study to take a look at what the long-term health impacts of those PFAS and PFOA chemicals are on humans. You know, we've got a lot of people at peas who have drunk that water over an extended period of time, families whose kids went to the child care centers there, and they need answers. They shouldn't worry when they drink water in New Hampshire or in the United States of America that that's going to be harmful to their health.
You talk about holding feet to the fire. You've already called on Administrator Scott Pruitt to resign. I mean, there's not much more you can do in terms of trying to hold feet to the fire.
Well, I think we need to continue to do that. You know, I oppose Scott Pruitt, and I think that decision has been warranted as we look at the 12 individual investigations into his behavior as the head of the EPA and improper spending of taxpayer dollars, improper appointments of people within his office. So I'm very concerned about the job he's doing, and I will continue calling on him to resign until he does, because he should not be in that position.
They see a potential PR nightmare if we do see the health advisory from the EPA go down from 70 parts per trillion for PFAS, perfluoroalkyl substances, or PFCs, whatever you want to call them.
I know it's a mouthful.
Right, I know they keep changing the terminology too.
Well, and because there are a whole bunch of these chemicals that are under that rating.
Under the umbrella.
So, yes.
But if we go down to 20 parts per trillion, not just a quote-unquote PR nightmare, there's going to be a lot of money that needs to be invested in water infrastructure as well.
And we have a lot that we need to do with our water infrastructure anyway. So it's part of what we need to do in terms of investing in our future, our water, our sewage systems, our roads, our bridges, our public buildings. All of this is part of the investment that we need to be making, and this is just another example of why we can't continue to push that to the future, why we need to make those investments now. From one scourge to another, let's talk about the opioid crisis. We know more federal money is on its way soon, but we've seen the study out of UNH now showing that 8.5% of babies born in Berlin are in active withdrawal from opioids, and compare this to a much lower figure. I believe 2.4% is the average statewide. We were discussing this earlier, and you said that that might be in question on the lower end there, but what can be done to help, particularly in the North Country? These numbers seem off the charts. Well, sadly, I visited a number of our rural hospitals where they have a very high percentage of babies being born who show the effects of their mothers with substance use disorders. And what we need to do is to make sure those hospitals, those mothers, those babies get the treatment they need. And that's what I've been working on in Washington. I'm pleased that we've got $3.3 billion in the budget for 2018 to address treatment, prevention, long-term recovery supports, law enforcement, all to try and help deal with the opioid epidemic. And you know, we've got another $3 billion in 2019. So we want to make sure that that money is spent most effectively, that it goes out to people who are in need, that we support programs like Friendship House in the North Country, so there's an in-treatment facility that people can go to and get the help they need. And that's why I'm so pleased to see that the legislature and the governor expanded Medicare in New Hampshire, that they continued that, because for most people that's the way they're getting treatment, and we need to make sure that continues. It's an election year. Both you and Senator Hassan have made endorsements in the Democratic primaries. In your case, you're backing former State Senator Molly Kelly over former Portsmouth Mayor Steve Marchand in the Democratic gubernatorial primary. Why intervene now when you haven't in the past? Well, I certainly like Steve Marchand. I've known him for a while, but I've known and worked with Molly Kelly for over 30 years. She's served multiple terms in the state Senate. She understands the challenges we have in New Hampshire and is going to support education and health care and good jobs for people in the state. And I think her experience and her understanding of how state government works are absolutely critical.
Should we read something into this, that you're doing this now? You've been very sort of careful in the past not to get too far into these things. What does this say about what's going on in the Democratic Party right now?
Oh, I don't think we should read anything into it. I think it's more about my relationship with Molly Kelly and thinking that she would do a great job.
You've been on both sides of this fence, both on the progressive insurgent side and the quote-unquote Democratic establishment. Is this something that will just persist for the perpetuity of the Democratic Party, or do you see this debate being won at some point, that this has to be a tension that is resolved within the Democratic Party, that one side will come out on top?
I like to think of the Democratic Party as having a big tent, and one of the great things about insurgent campaigns is that they bring new people into the process, and that's really important. You know, I got involved working on one of those campaigns with Gary Hart back in 1983, and it brought in a whole new group of people who have new ideas and new energy and new vision for where we want to go, and that's really important to the Democratic Party.
So who's right, though? I mean, is it? I mean, you're on the establishment side now. I mean, you've seen both sides here, right? And you're saying both are necessary, but one has to win.
I don't think it's a question of right and wrong. Listen, there's not much difference in the and there wasn't in the position between Hillary Clinton and Bernie Sanders on most issues. If you looked at how they had voted and where they were and what they were saying about things, so I think the important thing is for us to work together to not let those divisions separate us. You know, I remember the fight between Ted Kennedy and Jimmy Carter. When Jimmy Carter was president, there are a lot of people, including myself, who believe that that's the reason Jimmy Carter lost re-election. So that's what we don't want to do. We want, in the end, to understand that we're all working toward the same ends.
Superdelegates in the Democratic Party, obviously we're looking way ahead here, but there's a scenario in which we have all of these Democrats running, and it just ends up proportional, and we go to a convention that could be echoes of 1968. Are you worried about that at all?
My understanding is they're taking a look at the superdelegates, and they're going to make some changes in who gets counted and how. So I think that's probably a good thing.
One last political question here. Obviously, once we get past the November elections, it's time to start talking about your own re-election. Are you thinking at all about retirement?
I'm not going to make a decision until after this election. So one of the things that I have tried to do throughout my career is stay focused on the election coming up and not look too far ahead. So this is another example of that.